Welcome everybody to Bitcoin Down Under. My name is Pantelis Rasakis. I'm a web and digital marketing specialist and I've been active in the Australian Bitcoin space since 2012. Co-founder of the Bitcoin Association of Australia, marketing officer for bravenewcoin.com and currently communications manager for the Melbourne Bitcoin Technology Centre, which we'll talk about a bit later. In this brief overview, I'm going to cover emerging businesses, public adoption, regulation and some of the projects being undertaken around the country. Australia is a long way from the financial and cultural hubs of Europe and America, and it's diametrically opposed in time zone itself. And the Australian continent is vast, up to 5 time zones across the country and 1,000 kilometres between major cities. Most of all, Australia is well known for its lifestyle and love of technology, with over 65% smartphone saturation, internet connectivity with 83% adoption, and being well banked. But banking in Australia is quite expensive. The average cost to access banking is around $790 a year. So how's Bitcoin going in this environment? We have a vibrant community, but they're spread thinly across the country. 12 months ago, media reports around Bitcoin had centered on the Silk Road, illicit activities facilitated by Bitcoin, the collapse of Mt. Gox, which affected a proportionally high number of Australians, as Mt. Gox was the only exchange offering Australian Bitcoin exchange for quite some time, and everybody is closely monitoring the outcome of the bankruptcy proceedings. Now that landscape is changing. Bitcoin is being talked about in corporate, government and NGO circles, and it's being treated more like a legitimate instrument, carving out a role to play in the economic future of Australian business. With an emerging industry, a number of Bitcoin companies have come online, and over the last 24 months, both exchanges and resellers. One of the bigger resellers reported that 12 months to 2014, they did around $50 million in transactions and around 30,000 customers. Melbourne-based arbitrage fund Bitcoin Reserve reported a total return of 700% since opening in June 2013. The Australian Tax Office has released guidance on the income tax and goods and services treatment of Bitcoin, GST or VAT, but they've stopped short of calling it money, and at this time. Overall, there's a fair amount of clarity in relation to Bitcoin and treated by law. Obviously, there's still room for clarification. The law could be better, could reflect the actual use of Bitcoin in terms of the GST, and unsatisfied with the current guidance, there's been a number of companies that have paid for a private ruling which have had business positive outcomes, which sort of in part signals a willingness of the authorities to take notice of the community and the industry lobbying around the regulation. Even though the ATO's ruling haven't been favourable, the clarity of the position has allowed numerous Bitcoin companies to start. The regulation from the ATO essentially applies to goods and services on the purchase of Bitcoin, as well as a GST on the purchase of what you buy with your Bitcoin, effectively double dipping. So this has cut really heavily into the already small margins exchanges and resellers had, and some of the businesses that have put a foothold overseas, excuse me, such as CoinJar, who moved part of their operation to the UK. Although most of the Bitcoin community would prefer Bitcoin be unregulated, the reality is that regulation plays a critical role in drawing capital in. Legal clarity helps build more companies in the Bitcoin space, allows people to deal with Bitcoin more freely, and builds confidence, i.e. credibility, because of regulation. 3 key lessons that we've picked up in that period was that regulation clarity is of paramount importance, consumer adoption, interest and building a community helps, banking relationships are hard to maintain, and we've got a number of ATMs in most major cities, and that's been, Sydney I think has had the most success in the deployment. Jason Williams, CEO of BitPos, one of the point of sales providers, said that broadly speaking all the players have reported an overall increase in the interest in Bitcoin over the last 12 months. General interest and merchant adoption is up, with around 400 businesses officially listed to taking Bitcoin. In fact, Flight agency Webjet has just stepped in and accepted Bitcoin as payment, and we hope to see some high-profile organisations come on board over the next year where there are people working towards that. We've seen the emergence of community professional groups with Bitcoin professionals and startups in Sydney and Melbourne, and these groups have been attracting venture capital and angel investors and Bitcoin investment players, as well as fledgling businesses. They've had a main effort, of course, in the app development around the currency space. So Bitcoin is reaching into the traditional payment space with the increase of interest in the corporate sector for education, information at conferences, closed industry presentations centered around payment innovation and finance. Corporate interest in Bitcoin is not only focused on currency, but extends to interest in the use of blockchain technology for both internal and external applications. The Bitcoin 2.0 space, it's still its infancy, but it's providing opportunities to business which rely upon notarization, accountability, and record. As that look, remittance, intercompany transactions, possibly a SWIFT competitor, smart law, smart contracting, escrow, smart will and notary services, automated resource allocation, automated purchasing of power at the best price in the market, automatically connecting to Wi-Fi, using Bitcoin to pay for it, and even wages paid in real time. The community itself has been formalising around the establishment of the non-profit organisation, the Bitcoin Association of Australia, at the start of 2014, and the BAA positioned itself as a peak advocacy body dedicated to standardisation, protection and promotion of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in the region. And one of the things we discovered was education is paramount. Not just education about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but about money itself. A vast number of people have no real understanding of the money they use every day. Not where it comes from, not how it's made, not how it's produced, or even less about the understanding of the history of the current financial systems. And money education needs to start at elementary school, not left to parents to pass on their bad habits. This will allow young people at least to perceive a choice in the way they manage their wealth when entering into the workforce and becoming financially active. We formalised our affiliation with the Bitcoin Foundation in mid-2014, and that process itself gave us real insights into the diverse attitudes, particularly around privacy and autonomy, and how we fit into the global community. There's also a high-profile industry group called the Australian Digital Currency Association, who've been really active in negotiating with the ATO and the Taxation Office and the government. A host of meetups, groups have popped up in every city, Facebook groups, forums and alike. The National Bitcoin Boulevard campaign, which launched across the country in November. The initiative, undertaken by community and supported by Bitscan, sets out to provide local merchants with tools and the support to accept and trade in Bitcoin, as well as additional sales channels. In Melbourne, BTC Boulevard looks spearheaded by Sam Lee and the Chinatown Project, where the plan is to convert all 600 businesses in Chinatown precinct. And thanks to a handful of Bitcoin evangelists like Sam Lee, documentary maker Dale Dickens in Melbourne, there are people driving adoption in their own territories. For example, Adam Polton in Launceston, Tasmania, a city of 80,000 people, has partnered with BitPOS, Airbits, the wallet provider, BitRocket, ATM provider, to provide a one-stop shop service, Bitcoin service. He reports that merchant uptake has been good. He's got 18 merchants now accepting Bitcoin in the CBD. He's engaging with civil council about submitting a plan for further deployment. Business-to-business engagement, we've signed up computing service provider and a social marketing expert to accept Bitcoin, and they'll be ramping up their social media to start showing real-life examples of Bitcoin POS and Bitcoin ATM usage. In Queensland, Lucas Cullen about Bitcoin Brisbane said the community is growing with nearly 300 members at the meetups group, and they're really helping to onboard and educate new users. A few Bitcoin startups have successfully launched in Brisbane, in 2014, including Living Room of Satoshi, Bit2Bit.co, who are doing ATMs, as well as Open Bazaar founder Washington. Merchant adoption seems to have stalled a little, with a few merchants actually removing Bitcoin payments. Most inquiries coming from business owners already passionate about Bitcoin. However, Brisbane Boulevard is trying to change that and get more people on to the West End district, and they've had some meetings with local MPs trying to push the economic benefits of running the program. In Melbourne, the creation of the dedicated co-working space for Bitcoin startups, the MBTC, or Melbourne Bitcoin Technology Centre. In the first instance, it's a co-working space, and secondly, an incubator with a long-term vision to accelerate the enterprises that grow from the centre. And we're unique in the Southern Hemisphere as being the only space specifically nurturing a Bitcoin community with state-of-the-art facility, resources, and are also our own value structure. Our commitment is to be true to the blockchain, the values of the blockchain. So we've created a co-working token via Counterparty, which members can earn by their presence and in the space, and helping day-to-day running as well. Zipping over to New Zealand. New Zealand, Bitcoin's a mixed bag. There's a few startups. Regulation is a bit murky, but not too negative. No ATMs, but about 200 places are accepting Bitcoin. And the professional population seems to be more aware of it. Lawyers, accountants, developers. A few mega early Bitcoiners have moved to New Zealand to live out their days. Living on Bitcoin in New Zealand means you can pay for the internet, you can order various goods, but no mass consumer shops yet, so life on Bitcoin is a little bit still inconvenient. In the region, in terms of activity, over the last 12 months, we've had some really attended conferences inside Bitcoin in Sydney and Melbourne, and CryptoCon in Sydney. In New Zealand, Brave New Coins founder Fran Sanya organised a highly successful Bitcoin South. In the region, there were events in Singapore, Hong Kong, and not to mention the growing interest of mainland China, which has really shone a light on the growing opportunities in the Asia-Pacific region. In fact, the Asian Bitcoin hub is up for grabs and could prove to be the next big opportunity in the financial sector. Many Asian countries are well situated to being a hub for Bitcoin. Think remittance, mining, banking for the unbanked. Many countries in Asia already finance hubs like Hong Kong and Singapore, and Bitcoin could build on that. What would an Asian hub look like? Well, it would have a relatively clear regulatory framework, investor funds flowing in to fund Bitcoin-based companies, consumer interest and in the use of Bitcoin in a transactional way, and stronger community of Bitcoin companies and enthusiasts. So in summary, one of the biggest hurdle that we're facing in this country around public adoption is the fact that Australia has a relatively stable political and banking situation, and so adoption's been slower than in less developed countries. With an overall attitude is that the system we have seems to be serving us well, it works, why should we change or try something untested? So that's a little bit about the scene in Australia. Please stick around for some questions. Thanks for your time. I'd like to acknowledge the help of Alan Sen, Lucas Cullen, Adam Polton from Tasmania, Jason Williams in Sydney in putting this together. Thank you.